The Crusades, Western Europe's attempt to recapture the Holy Land from the Muslims, which began at the end of the 11th century. The war between the Saracens and the Christians, a time of strife and division that would lead to future conflicts that boil over into today's world. The Crusades were called for by the Church as an effort to reclaim the Holy Land and reconquer it for Christ. For centuries, the Eastern Orthodox Byzantine Empire had controlled the Middle East, but after the rise of Islam, the Abbasid Caliphate, and eventually the Seljuk Turks, fierce fighters and mighty warriors had taken the land away. The Seljuks were completely brutal and had won many victories against the Eastern Roman Empire. The Byzantines called for help from the Catholics, and they got it in the form of the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade, saying, Deus vult, God willed it. Contrary to popular beliefs, the Crusaders did not go for the sake of greed, were completely devoted to their spiritual ideas, and were not unharassed, seeking to answer Muslim aggression with an aggression of their own. The First Crusade, which began in 1095, is probably the most successful crusade in that it managed to reconquer most of the Holy Land in Jerusalem. Responding to the aggressiveness of the Seljuk Turks and other Muslims against both the Byzantine Empire and against Christian pilgrims in Jerusalem, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus asked the Pope Urban II to call a holy war to reconquer the land and help the Byzantines, and the Pope did so at the Council of Clermont in 1095, saying Deus vult, God wills it. The first part of the crusade, the People's Crusade, led by the monk Peter the Hermit, was mainly made up of poor Christians who quickly turned on Europe's Jewish population, killing many of them, such as at the massacre of the Rhineland in Germany. This part of the crusade ended terribly as they were surprised and massacred by the Seljuks. The second part of the crusade, the Prince's Crusade, was much more successful with the likes of Robert of Normandy and Geoffrey of Boulogne. Both of these leaders and many others were able to make the arduous journey through Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, into the Holy Land, and were able to win major victories, including conquering Jerusalem in 1099 and establishing the Crusader states. The First Crusade had been successful in reconquering the Holy Land and taking the hallowed city of Jerusalem, as well as in establishing 4 Christian states: Antioch, Jerusalem, Tripoli, and Edessa, the latter of which would fall to Imad el-Din Zengi, the ruler of the Zengi Sultanate of Syria. When the shocking word reached Europe, Pope Eugene III called for a second crusade. To recruit support, he turned to Bernard, the abbot of Clairvaux and future saint, who made a profound impact by his good speech on European leaders, recruiting many of them, including Louis VII, the King of France, and Conrad III, the Holy Roman Emperor, to join. At first, they assisted Spain and Portugal in their efforts to remove the Umayyad Caliphate. They liberated Lisbon and achieved some successes in Spain before turning their attention eastward, going across Byzantine lands, especially Anatolia, without gaining any Byzantine support until they reached Jerusalem. Here, they replenished their forces and marched on Syria to liberate Edessa. They besieged Damascus, but the siege was a failure as the Muslims withstood their Christian invaders. The Europeans fled, their only consolation being their victories in Iberia. After the Crusader state of Edessa had fallen to the Zengi Sultanate and the Christians had been unable to restore the kingdom in the failed Second Crusade, there was a time of relative peace. But under the command of Saladin, one of Islam's greatest generals and leaders, the Ayyubid Sultanate challenged the Christians. At first, Baldwin IV, the famous leper king, was able to withstand the Muslims and Saladin, preserving Jerusalem. But in 1187, after Baldwin's death, Saladin was successful and conquered the city of Jerusalem, dealing a huge blow to the Crusader states. Naturally, the Pope called for a crusade and recruited Richard the Lionheart, the King of England, and Philip II of France to lead a coalition to recapture the Holy City. The Crusaders had a lot of momentum and potential, but infighting and a slow start led to many problems despite their successful conquering of the city of Acre in 1191. The continued fighting would lead Philip to pull out of the crusade, leaving Richard to fend for himself. And although Richard would do quite well taking the cities of Tyre and Jaffa, he was unable to conquer Jerusalem and was forced to sign a peace treaty with Saladin in 1192 at Jaffa, ending the Third Crusade and cementing the 3 remaining Crusader states. The Third Crusade had secured the Christian Crusader states left in the Levant after the Christians had been unable to defeat Saladin. Soon after this, Pope Innocent III, one of the most influential popes of all time, called for another crusade. He would call for more crusades than any other pope. This Fourth Crusade began in 1202, but ended in 1204 abruptly when the Christians turned on their Byzantine allies and ransacked and captured the city of Constantinople, driving a further wedge between the Byzantine Orthodox Christians and the Catholics. This was the last major crusade, as it embarrassed the Christians, and the Fifth and Sixth Crusade also failed to conquer Egypt. Meanwhile, other crusades helped the Spanish retake Spain and kick the Muslims out during the Reconquista. Many crusades at this time and before had been called for in Europe to eradicate heretics, such as the Catharis in southern France. Also in 1291, the final Crusader state in Acre fell to the Muslim aggression. There is also the notorious Children's Crusade of 1215 that is highly exaggerated, with no children actually having gone and fought in the Middle East. But by 1300 it had become obvious that the Crusades had failed to conquer and maintain Jerusalem and the Holy Land. The Crusades were a series of campaigns to retake the Holy Land from the Muslims. But what were their lasting effects and long-term impacts? Well, the Crusades brought a larger sense to Europe, particularly Western Europe, of the unifying force of Christianity, of the uniqueness of Roman Catholicism. And for many, it did not make them rich or powerful. And the only time they did get rich was when they were plundering fellow Christians or massacring Jews, such as they did at the beginning of the First Crusade. And the lands they won in the Holy Land, they lost. It did bring about Spain's independence in the reconquista, but many crusaders brought back with them not wealth, but knowledge, information and texts from the Holy Land preserved by the Muslims that would soon spark on Renaissance thinking and learning. It also united Europe more and gave it a common purpose, and it created a lasting connection between the Middle East, Islam, and Christianity, creating tensions between the two of them. And it has become a defining feature of the Middle Ages, knights and ladies and lords, and fighting crusades to liberate the Holy Land.